Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today is day one or video one of a new series we're starting here on mixing a song from start to finish. So here in video number one, we are going to go over setting up the mix session. We are looking at setting up the mix session here in video number one of our mixing a song from start to finish. But before we dive in here, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF that will walk you through the entire mixing process from start to finish, step by step, to help you get professional and radio ready mixes without any more of the hassle and without any more of the guesswork. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and look at setting up the mix session here. So we've got all the tracks in. This session has been finished recording. Oh, it's got some things jumping around. That's okay. Now, I want to talk about the organization of the session and then the routing, and we'll talk about any plugins that we have on to begin with here, which shouldn't be many. Okay, so organization first. We have all of our tracks in. They are grouped together with likewise tracks, and then they are put into buses and folders. So starting up here, we have our drums first, and that includes our percussion track, our little tambourine there. Our drums are all blue. They are sent to our drum bus folder, as you can see. So all of our drums are running into our drum bus. This is our drum bus here. And then our drum bus, our drum bus is also a folder here, so we can pack all of our stuff into one folder for organizational purposes. Moving down from there, we have our bass guitar. Our bass guitar is red. Our two bass guitars, our DI and our amp, are sending into the bass bus here. And our bass bus, again, is packed into a folder. So that's linked to our folder there, as you can see when the icon moves. Moving over from there, we have our electric guitars. We got two electric guitars, a lead guitar and a rhythm guitar. These are green. These are a darker green. Our acoustic guitars are a lighter green there. And these are sent to the electrics bus here. And again, our electrics bus is linked to the folder there. Last set of guitars, we have our acoustic guitars. Even though we only have one track, it's still sent into an acoustics bus. And then our acoustics bus linked to our folder. Keys are pink here, or hot pink. We have our piano and our organ. These are sent into the keys bus here, and then that is linked to the folder. Last but not least here, we have our lead vocal. Our lead vocal is sending into the Vox bus. Again, even we got one track still sending into the bus here, and that's linked to the Vox folder. Now, all of our main buses here are sending into what we have called Mix A. So this is my pseudo mix bus down over here. So all of our tracks, you can see, even the effects here, we'll talk about the effects in a second, are sending into Mix A. Now Mix A, my pseudo mix bus, starts with the console shaper. So this is the PreSonus State Space console shaper. So given some of that analog console vibe, the drive is on, but all the way down at 0. That's where I leave it. Just a little bit of that console vibe adds some depth and a little bit of weight to the mix as well. I don't use the noise. Sometimes I use the noise. I'll click it on at 16, but more often than that, I leave that off. And I've never used I never used the crosstalk. I have used it before, but I don't use that on my mixes. So those are all the way down, and those are both off as well. Moving down from there, we have the fat channel. So this is my mix bus compressor. I like using the Britcomp, which is the SSL style bus compressor here. We have the threshold down at -1.6, so that's something I never touch as well. I leave that set where it is, and I mix into that. That's why these things are on here from the beginning. These are part of the setup. Ratio is as gentle as possible, 2-to-1 ratio here on the unit. And then same thing with our attack and release. Our attack and release are as gentle as possible. Our attack, 30 millisecond attack, so the slowest attack here. That's to make sure we're not squashing any transients or clamping down on anything in the mix, because everything is running into this mix bus compressor. Release is as fast as possible. We're at 100 millisecond release, or a 0.1 second release, so as fast as possible. Again, just making sure we're not holding on to anything too long and we're letting go so everything can breathe and the mix can work together. The main goal here with the mix bus compressor, you'll see as we get things up and we get our levels running, is just to glue everything together and get that little bit of movement on everything as a whole. And last thing we do here, because I'm usually doing about a dB to maybe 2 dB reduction on the entire mix, is a little bit of makeup gain. We're doing a dB of makeup gain there. Last here on the mix bus is the soft tube tape machine. So this is actually one of the only non-Studio One or PreSonus native plugins that I use. This is the soft tube tape machine, and I run this pretty close to the default settings. So the amount is just bumped up 0.1 to 5.1 here. I just like the meter to be between -10 and -5 here on the VU meter. From there over to the type, I use the B type. For me, the B type adds the most low end and the most weight, and that's what I like out of the tape machine, that warmth and that weight in the low end. And then the tape speed is all the way up at 30 IPS. If I was using it on an individual track, I'd probably pull it down to 15 IPS, but here on the entire mix as a whole, we are up at 30 IPS, and we're not touching any of the settings over here. These are all default settings on that. Last thing we have here on the actual mix bus, so what our mix A is sending into, is a limiter. Now the limiter is set at -1 ceiling, so these are sort of mastering settings for the limiter. I like to mix with a mastering limiter on, so that way when I send things to mastering and I bump up that volume, we don't have any wide discrepancies frequency-wise or balance-wise inside the mix. No surprises there. And then the gain is up 6 dB. So I'm mixing 6 dB down, and I use this limiter to bump me 6 dB up, so I'm at a mastering sort of level there. Let's talk about the effects now that I have loaded in. So this is my template. That's why you can see everything's kind of set up and organized already here. Built into my template, I have the Bricasti close here. So this is what the drums are going to send into here to give me a room sound. All this is it's the open air reverb. So this is the IR loader inside of Studio One. Where is it at here? Ooh, the open air reverb right here. It allows you to load IRs in. So I'm loading in one of the Simplicity packs, the Bricasti Close. It is Studio B, so Room 2 Studio B Close mics. And I have pulled the length down to about 400 milliseconds. So this allows me to send my drums to this room reverb here and pull it up, and then I'll have a drum room that I can pull up underneath my drums there to give them more extra liveliness, any extra energy and bigness that I need to add into my mix, I can pull up from there. Following the reverb there, the IR is a little bit of EQ, just rolling off the super lows there and the super highs. I don't want to hear too much of the cymbal noise in the room mic, so we're rolling off 10K and above, and then we're rolling off 200 and below to make sure our kick drum or any low end we have isn't blowing up the reverb here, because that wouldn't sound natural. Last but not least here is this binaural pan, and all this is doing is narrowing up the reverb. To me, when I use this reverb, it tends to be too wide sounding, and that to me feels unnatural. So I narrow it up to about 54%. It feels natural, feels live, makes the drums feel more realistic to me inside the mix. We do have a couple plugins loaded in on the amp and DI. I always split the amp and DI frequencies, so here's our DI. We're only using the bottom end from the DI. So everything 180 hertz and below, that's what we're using from our DI. I like to keep the low end coming from one source. When they're coming from both the DI and the amp, I tend to get phase issues that I have to contend with later in the mix. I don't want to deal with that. I want to have one source of low end that I can make as powerful as I need without any issues. And then our bass amp is just the opposite, 180 hertz and above there. And those are both 24 dB per octave slopes to make sure we're minimizing the phase we get in the crossover. Nothing here. We're down to our effects. I don't know how many of these I will actually use. I rarely use all of them these days. I only end up using pretty much the plate reverb, the CLA plate reverb for the vocals. Sometimes I use the flat plate for organ and stuff, or lead guitars. Medium studio reverb, I often opt not to use, and I end up just pushing the room reverb farther there. Slap delay I use sometimes here. This is a pretty standard slap, 100 millisecond slap delay with a low cut and a high cut in. So our low cut's up at 250 hertz, making sure we're not getting too much of that muddiness or low end. We don't need that coming through on the slap delay. We want to get that, again, mainly from one source, which would be our lead vocal. And then a high cut down to 3K. Sometimes with the slap delay, too much of that 3 or 4K area can get harsh and can get brittle. And then layering that on top of your vocal can make your vocal too harsh. And it'll poke out too much in that 4K area. The drive I have all the way up, so it's a distorted slap delay. But if I don't need it, I can always pull that down if need be. But I leave that up on 100% mix there. Moving on over to the vocal plate reverb. These settings changed as Studio One updated, but all it is it's about a 2-second plate reverb with a 152 millisecond pre-delay. So that pre-delay makes sure that the reverb comes after the vocal and it's not sitting right on top of it, making the vocal muddy or too heavy sounding in the low mid area. The flat plate reverb is about a 6-second plate reverb, so a very long plate reverb, and I like to throw this on lead guitars or organs and pads to give them that length and to give them that extra depth. Last but not least here, we have the room reverb, and all this is the medium studio reverb here inside of Studio One. I believe it's like a 750 millisecond or 800 millisecond room, and then all of the reverbs have this EQ underneath them, just rolling off everything below 200 hertz, just to make sure all that low end isn't coming in and making our reverbs too heavy or too muddy sounding. That should be it here for setup. You can see where we're sitting. We have our edits still in from when we edited this track, but other than that, everything is in and ready to go. We have our markers set up, so if you want to do that, set start and end markers. You can set chorus and intro and verse markers if you need to. We're not going to do that here. That should be it here for video number 1 for setup. If you have any questions, if I missed anything, feel free to comment below and I will do my best to answer anything as we move along here with this series. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level and really start dialing in your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.